In 1965, Bakersfield, California was the kind of town where people trusted familiar faces. The grocer, the mailman, the local sheriff, and above all, the doctor. In a small town, the doctor was a pillar of the community, a figure of unquestionable authority. His word was law. His diagnosis was fact. One of those men, one of those trusted faces, was Stanley Armour. He certainly looked the part. He called himself a doctor. He wore a crisp white coat. He spoke with the calm, measured confidence you'd expect from someone holding your life in their hands. But what no one in Bakersfield knew, what no one could have possibly imagined, was that Stanley Armour wasn't a doctor at all. His medical office was a modest affair, tucked away on Main Street. It was small, unassuming. There was no hospital affiliation proudly displayed on the door. No team of partners or bustling nurses in the hallway. There was just him, a stethoscope draped around his neck, and an almost unnerving level of patience, however, seemed to like his style. He was fast, efficient, appointments were brief, often lasting just a few minutes. He didn't bother with extensive paperwork or ask too many prying questions. He got right to the point. People saw it as competence, not carelessness. It was a simpler time, and Stanley Moore fit right in, until one quiet, ordinary afternoon when everything changed forever. The man who walked into Moore's office that day was Frank Delaney. He was 58 years old, a hard-working mechanic with grease under his fingernails and a kind face. He was a regular patient, familiar with Moore's quick consultations. On this particular day, Frank complained of feeling dizzy, a little lightheaded. Nothing that seemed terribly unusual or alarming. Moore listened, nodding slightly. He began to speak, offering his usual and then, without warning, in the middle of a sentence, Frank Delaney collapsed. He fell to the floor with a heavy thud that seemed to suck all the air out of the small room. Witnesses who were in the waiting area would later describe the chilling silence that followed. The rustling of magazines stopped. A clock on the wall seemed to tick louder than ever before. Moore knelt down beside Frank's still form. He didn't reach for a phone. He didn't shout for help. He simply placed 2 fingers on Frank's wrist. He closed his eyes as if in deep concentration. He counted silently. 1, 2, 3. Then he stood up, brushed off his trousers, and made a declaration that would echo through the town for decades. With a calm finality, he said, "He's gone." Just like that. There was no attempt at resuscitation, no chest compressions, no CPR, no call for an ambulance or a defibrillator. Just a 3-second pulse check and a death certificate. In the eyes of Stanley Armour, and therefore in the eyes of the law, Frank Delaney was dead. The hours that followed moved with a surreal speed. The wheels of bureaucracy turned, set in motion by a single, confident lie. Frank Delaney was officially pronounced dead. Given the supposed doctor's diagnosis of a sudden, fatal event, no one thought to question it. No autopsy was requested. No second opinion was sought. In a town built on trust, the doctor's word was enough. The next day, surrounded by grieving family who had no reason to doubt the official story, Frank Delaney was buried 6 feet under the California soil. That should have been the end of the story. A sad, sudden loss for a family and a community. But it wasn't. A seed of doubt had been planted, and it was about to grow into something monstrous. A few days after the funeral, something began to gnaw at the coroner's assistant. He was a meticulous man, a stickler for details. Reviewing the paperwork, he found that Frank's medical history just didn't add up. There was no record of heart disease, no prior episodes, no red flags that would point to such an abrupt and total collapse. It was an anomaly, a loose thread in an otherwise tidy narrative. But it was just a feeling, not evidence. Then, the first real crack appeared in Moore's story. A gravedigger came forward. He was hesitant, worried he'd be dismissed as a fool or a drunkard, but his conscience wouldn't let him stay silent. He told the sheriff's office something strange, something horrifying. He said that during the burial, as the coffin was being lowered, he'd heard something, and later, when he was filling the grave, he noticed something on the inside of the coffin lid. Scratch marks. At first, his story was met with skepticism. It sounded like something out of a gothic horror novel, a grim fantasy. But the coroner's assistant's initial doubts, combined with the gravedigger's chilling testimony, were enough. An order was given, an order that no one ever wants to give, or to his savior. Frank Delaney's coffin was to be The air at the cemetery was thick with a tense, morbid anticipation as the casket was raised from the earth. When the lid was finally pried open, The investigators froze. The scene inside was a silent testament to a nightmare. Frank Delaney's body had shifted. It was no longer resting peacefully. His fingers were bent and broken, the nails torn. His mouth was open in a silent scream. The fabric lining the inside of the lid was the scratches the gravedigger had seen were deep, frantic gouges in the wood. The horrifying evidence was undeniable. Frank Delaney had regained consciousness. He had woken up to find himself trapped in a dark, silent box, buried alive. He hadn't been dead when Stanley Moore pronounced him so. He had woken up underground, alone, in the ultimate prison. The investigation into Stanley R. Moore unraveled with astonishing speed. The man who had built a career on confidence had his entire life exposed as a fraud. A simple background check revealed the shocking truth. Stanley R. Moore was not a licensed doctor. He had never attended medical school, not for a single day. His credentials, the diplomas hanging on his office wall, were elaborate forgeries. His entire practice was a lie. His method for determining death? It was nothing more than guesswork. A brief check for a pulse. A gut feeling. Investigators discovered that he had declared at least 5 other patients dead over the years, all in the same swift, careless manner. How many of them were also misdiagnosed? It was a question that would haunt the town. Frank was just the only one where the proof was irrefutable. His desperate struggle etched into the inside of his own coffin. Moore was arrested and charged with criminal negligence and massive fraud. Throughout the trial, he never showed a flicker of remorse or guilt. He remained as calm and self-assured as he had been in his fake medical office. When asked in court to explain his actions, how he could have been so certain, so quick to condemn a man to his grave, his answer was chillingly simple. He just shrugged and said, "I thought he was dead." The aftermath of the case sent shockwaves through Bakersfield and beyond. The trust that had once been the town's bedrock was shattered. New stringent laws were passed to govern how and when a person could be legally declared dead. Medical licensing and verification procedures were tightened across the state, ensuring that a fraud like Stanley Moore could never practice again. The case became a grim cautionary tale for the entire medical profession. But for Frank Delaney, there was no justice. His gravestone still stands in that Bakersfield cemetery, a quiet, lonely monument. It's a reminder of a man who died not once, but twice. First by the incompetence of a man he trusted, and then again, alone in the dark. It's a reminder of what happens when authority is trusted without question, when confidence is mistaken for sometimes the most dangerous thing in the world isn't malice or evil. It's confidence without knowledge. And sometimes, as Frank Delaney learned in the most terrible way imaginable, 3 seconds can be the difference between life and death. Thank you for watching. If you found this story as compelling as we did, please consider subscribing for more deep dives into the forgotten corners of history.